the speakers, Mr. Mitesh Shah, General Manager, Louis Dreyfus India Commodities Private Limited, Mr. Sian Xiao, Knowledge Management Manager, Olam Shanghai Limited, Mr. James Johnson, Agricultural Economist, USDA Foreign Agricultural Service. And Mr. B.K. Patodia, who is already there on stage, is chairing the session 5 of the day. Mr. B.K. Patodia is the Chairman and Managing Director of GTN Textiles Limited, Chairman of Patspin India Limited and GTN Enterprises Limited. He is at the helm of well-known GTN group of companies which has grown under his leadership from 12,000 spindles to 215,000 spindles. GTN Group is a pioneer in setting up compact spinning in India and leading exporter of fine and superfine combed cotton yarns. In the past 35 years, GTN Group has won 35 trophies for being the best cotton yarn exporter from the country. Mr. Patodia is a past chairman of Indian Cotton Mills Federation, the Cotton Textiles Export Promotion Council, and Southern India Mills Association, Coimbatore. Mr. Patodia is a member of the advisory board of the Committee of Management of International Textile Manufacturers Federation, Zurich. He is also a member of the Spinner Committee of ITMF and past chairman of Joint Cotton Committee. Mr. Patodia continues to serve on Cotton Advisory Board and Cotton Yarn Advisory Board constituted by the Ministry of Textiles, Government of India. Over to Mr. B.K. Patodia.
I'm here because City Chairman Mr. Prem Malik could not come here due to some emergency, and Dhiren Bhai asked me to step into his shoes, which I'm happy to do. So this session is long-run outlook for structural changes, market updates. The first speaker is Mr. Mitesh Shah. Mr. Mitesh Shah joined the cotton business in 2001 as an agent. After spending 8 years in cotton business, he joined Louis Dreyfus Commodities as a cotton trader in 2009. As a trader based in Gurgaon, he is responsible for origination of cotton from Andhra Pradesh in the first year, post which he quickly moved on to originating Gujarat cotton among other Indian trading responsibilities. He now heads the Indian cotton trading team at LDC since early 2012. On an academic and personal note, Mitesh is an MBA from 2000 batch of NMI MS Mumbai. He is happily married with twin daughters. Mr. Mitesh Shah. Okay, so Mr. Mitesh Shah's topic is, will India be the next China?
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Mr. Patodia, for the kind introduction. This topic that I've been asked to talk about is India the next China, as we all know, is a hotly debated topic outside of the cotton industry. Actually, earlier on, talking about whether GDP growth rates are going to be Indian GDP growth rates are going to be as big as the Chinese GDP growth rates over the last few years, or whether India is a bigger market opportunity than China in the emerging markets. Cotton, I believe, is almost a microcosm of this larger macro debate, and hence it becomes very interesting to my mind when we talk about whether India is going to be the next China. And before we try and really predict what's going to be the future structure in terms of who's going to be a net importer or who's going to be a exportable surplus country, I think it is only fair that we dwell a little bit on the past. And as the wise Rafiki said in The Lion King, it's easier always to learn from it than to run away from it. So starting with China, just to talk about how did we get to where we are at right now. As we all know, and I guess, sorry. As we all know, and I guess a lot of people, a lot of speakers earlier have already spoken about the Chinese government policy since 2011. We've seen the Chinese government procure almost all of its domestic cotton crop at 30 to 40% above world prices, and this is basically backed on the policy that emanated in China from its want to support the sensitive farmers in Xinjiang area, and to ensure stability in cotton prices post the 2011 spike in prices, which saw cotton over $2. While China was buying a massive number of bales in its own domestic market, it was also fairly generous, issuing quotas and also buying imported cotton on its own, which actually sent a signal to the world farmers that they should keep planting cotton, and that kind of was an artificial message, if you like, because fundamentally speaking, the consumption of cotton was not growing, but since there was a high-priced bidder in the market in the Chinese government, the world farmer got the signal that he should keep planting cotton versus other commodities. What did that do? And you can look at this chart where you see in 2011, China owned only 21% of world stocks, but earlier this year in July 2014, China now owns as much as 62% of world stocks, which is absolutely unprecedented in the history of the trade. And then I turn on to this very interesting statistic, which is an estimate that we have made. And since the reserve program is not only restricted to cotton, as we all know, this estimates the financial burden that the Chinese government has taken onto itself in all commodities put together. So while we try and study the structure of the cotton market in China and in India, I think it is of paramount importance that we look at what the Chinese government policy has done to its finances. And if you look at that, there is an estimated 534 billion renminbis that the Chinese government has spent in increased utilization of capital to build up reserves in 2013 versus 2005 in those 8 years. And almost half of it was because of cotton. As you can see, 239 billion renminbi was for cotton. Also the carry out to use ratios, as you can see, in 2005-06 versus 2013-14 were really small. So the carry out to use has gone up significantly because the Chinese government was the best bidder of its own commodities. Also, not to miss, the government also spends almost $9 billion or 57 billion RMBs per year to carry all of this stock. When you equate this to dollar terms at current market exchange rate, I think it's almost over $85 billion that the Chinese government has spent on its reserve programs in cotton, corn, wheat, paddy, all of these commodities. What that did was also is quite evident on this chart, which is basically a measure of agri-subsidy revenue, agri-subsidy as a ratio of agri-revenue. And as you can see, all countries except China over the last 8 years have actually reduced their outlay, subsidy outlay. But the Chinese subsidy outlay is the only one that has ticked higher. So getting on to production in China, just a quick look. The bulk of the production in China happens in Xinjiang, which is the northwest, the purple state that you can see, the province that you can see, where almost 60% of the cotton is grown. And it mainly competes with wheat and corn there. And then the balance of the crop is produced in the North China Plain and the Yangtze River provinces of Jiangsu and Hebei, where again it competes mainly with corn and wheat, but in Yangtze River it also competes a little bit with oilseeds outside of wheat and corn. But this is a very striking graph. If you were to pay attention to this one, you see that the black graph that you see on the left is the gross margin estimates of cotton with labor cost over the last 9 or 10 years in China. And the right-hand side tells you what it is without the labor cost. The red and the blue graphs, the light blue graph is basically the main competing crops of wheat and corn, where you don't see a lot of change. But the cotton graph is pretty striking, and it shows that labor cost is rising so drastically in China that it almost becomes a negative proposition to produce cotton in China. And this is mainly in the interior provinces. What that has done to area in China is exactly what you can see on the graphs right there. It has lost area in cotton over the last 10 years, mainly to corn and also to wheat and paddy. Cotton has lost as much as 70% area in the last 10 years in China. But of course the yield has been pretty good. China anyways has been one of the highest yielding nations as far as cotton goes. But even so, over the last 10 years you've seen the Chinese yields take a leap of almost 40%, which ensured that the production in China was more or less stable and in fact grew a little bit as well over the last 10 years. When you look at Chinese cotton use, we obviously saw a couple of peaks in 2007 and 2009, which is also when the world consumption was at the highest, which is obviously not surprising with China being such a dominant force in world consumption. But over the last 3 or 4 years, we've seen the reserve policy taking a big toll on the Chinese cotton use. The cotton imports graph is obviously a story of Chinese government policy because it is completely subject to import licenses issued by the Chinese government. Except last year in 2013 when there was some cotton that did sneak under the 40% tax as well. Almost all of it is completely Chinese policy driven. Going on to study the Indian structure over the past 10 years, I think this is a very interesting graph which basically tells you what the government's priorities have been, whether they were right or wrong, what the Indian government's priorities have been as far as promoting which crop against which other one. And this graph is basically a difference in MSP, in the change in MSP between cotton and its competing commodities. So if you can see over the last 10 years, the increase in MSP in cotton in India has been a lot bigger than the rest of the crops. What it tells you is that the Indian government has been extremely kind to the Indian cotton farmer versus the other farmers who grow other commodities. And that has obviously led to that green bar that you see right there, which continues to keep growing. To everybody's surprise, even while India is the largest area under cotton in the world, we keep gaining area year on year. The big success story for India obviously has been the BT seed that was introduced sometime around 2002-3. And since then we've grown manifold in the yield, which has also led to a massive increase in production by almost from 14 million Indian-sized bales to 40 million today. But of course, even so, after the BT revolution, we still continue to remain the lowest yielding cotton growing country in the world. The consumption, however, has also increased, but however has not kept pace with the production increase, which has just completely leapfrogged. So obviously we've turned into a big exportable surplus country, as you can see here. And obviously we've seen some distortions in Indian export policy, which you can see in that graph, which is going up and down a little bit. And of course the 2008-9 time frame when we saw a big MSP here in India, which is also when Indian exports were really low. So what can we learn from the past as we try to see what the future holds for us? And while I talk about while I get to talking about what the future holds as far as the structure of the cotton trade in India and China is concerned, I'd like to dwell upon some learnings that India probably can have from China. And that is of course not to say that China is a perfect cotton market, but still there is always good learnings from markets outside of India that India can gain in. So starting with farming, if you look at the Chinese way of farming, the land size is obviously slightly bigger than India, but again comparable. The land holdings are pretty small, fragmented, unlike Brazil, Australia or US. So there must be some learning that India can get on the farming front from China. And when we talk about farming, I think a few speakers earlier did speak about higher density planting. But just to give you the stark difference between India and China as far as the density in planting is concerned, in Xinjiang, the density that the farmers plant is reflected in the numbers that you can see on the screen here. As big as 200,000 plants per hectare versus 15,000 plants per hectare in Gujarat. While we almost tend to grow a tree of cotton in India, the counterparts in China resort to smaller plants with actually only 6 to 8 bolls per plant, while India has as many as 40 bolls per plant in a good season. But the number of plants simply just outstretch the amount of yield that you can gain. It also has extensive usage of drip irrigation, especially in Xinjiang, where almost all of the farms have drip irrigation pipes right through their farms. And they also use plastic film on top of their plants on top of their seeds as they plant them to ensure that the moisture does not evaporate and they take full advantage of the drip irrigation while they plant their cotton. They also have very well designed planting machines, sowing machines that allow for really good plantation as well as spacing, which is very uniform across farms, which also leads to them able to share the sowing machines amongst different farms, which basically incentivizes efficient use of capital as well. And also they've moved on to mechanized harvesting because of the uniform plant spacing. Going on to the trade, I see quite a lot of learnings that we can gain from the way China trades. Obviously with the advent of the reserve, a lot of the Chinese ginning industry has moved on to producing big bales, the 227 kilo bales with excellent packaging, which is quite missing in India, as we all know. It has also developed massive warehouse space and infrastructure on the back of various commodity reserve programs. Now the China Fiber Inspection Bureau classes close to 100% of the Chinese crop now, just like the USDA does. Going on to exchanges, there is of course learning not only from ICE but ZCE as well, where this year, after the reserve moved out of business in China and Chinese cotton started trading freely, we saw volumes, daily volumes in China go as high as 2.5 million tons. That means the Chinese pretty much can trade their whole crop in 2.5 days. The kind of volume is completely unprecedented even on ice. And that is obviously a result of extremely fair and reliable certification that the ZC conducts, and also very, very market-driven premiums and discounts for each quality that is tenderable on the ZC. And one more interesting statistics this year has been the spec participation in ZCE. The specs are back, giving us liquidity to trade for all of us commercials. And as a percentage of open interest, they have been as big as 70% this year. Going on to mills, China obviously is a supermarket as far as the textile industry is concerned. When you talk about downstream growth in textile industry, it's something that everyone really envies on the spinning as well as the downstream front. Someone like Walmart can pretty much just walk into China and buy their whole annual textile needs from China. The kind of supermarket-like environment that China provides to such big buyers is something that India can learn, I think, in terms of what it really needs to promote. And I believe it's downstream industries that really India needs to promote in the textile supply chain. Talking about the technology as well as the adaptability in terms of spinning, the Chinese spinners saw the worst times over the last 3 years when they were spinning pretty much the costliest cotton in the world by far, almost 40% costlier than their Indian or other counterparts across the world. And what they learned was something that was twofold, I thought. On one end, they ended up creating big niche products like the high-end, contamination-free kind of yarns that we saw them spinning out of the Australian cotton, which is why we also saw the massive premiums that the Chinese were willing to pay for the Australian. And on the other hand, the Chinese also adapted to producing the same count using actually a cheaper and a much worse piece of cotton than what the world uses. And what our Chinese office tells us is that earlier they used to spin 32's count with a typical 328 Chinese grade, which is a grade 328 mm style of cotton in China, a grade 3 being a middling to street middling style in China. But today they can almost use 60% 428, which is a 1 grade lower cotton, and 40% 527, which is a lot lower than the 328, and still spin 32's of the same quality. That is telling us something about the kind of efficiency and the adaptability that the Chinese textile industry has shown in really adverse times. And that, of course, is brought about by extremely trained and skilled textile workforce that China has been able to develop. Coming on to my favorite part on policy, what can India learn from China? I think it's extremely interesting. Instead of what can India learn, I would say what can India unlearn? And I think what India can actually learn is what not to do. When you talk about when you talk about the Chinese policy over the last 3 years, and obviously the Chinese found it out or learned it the more expensive way by spending as much as $45 billion on the reserve program. It has already embarked, as we know, onto direct cash transfers of subsidy, now not distorting the marketplace and creating massive stocks in its godowns for cotton. Maybe that is something that can be debated in India, whether instead of MSP, the government could make direct cash subsidy transfers to farmers, especially with the newfound big growth in bank accounts that the new government has embarked upon. It also can provide for or promote freer commodity markets in India. In China, as we saw earlier on the slides, there is a huge spec participation. Today in India, in most of our commodity markets, whether it's NCX or NCDX, we hardly have much spec participation. If at all there is some spec participation, it's really the small speculators, traders, who want to get in and out of the positions really quickly. We need to allow for organized spec participation, which means we need to allow banks, financial institutions, hedge funds, index funds to be allowed to trade in commodity markets in India. and that will ensure market making. We can also learn by controlling and distributing better seeds. I think by last estimate there were as many as 1,500 seed varieties still prevalent in India. And of course, the big dependence on monsoon is still a hindrance to our yields. So better investment in irrigation, more efficient irrigation systems is as well something that we can learn. And finally, of course, the tighter quality packaging and moisture standards that are already there actually in the Bureau of Indian Standards need to be implemented much more tightly. So while we looked at the past and also saw what we could learn, now I'd see if we can give it a try to see what the future holds for us. Starting with consumption, the world fiber use, as we all have seen over the past many years, many decades actually, pretty much mirrors the world GDP growth. And if you look at the world GDP growth forecast by World Bank or by any other such institution, they're talking about 3.7% per annum growth in GDP. So we believe that it's a fair assumption to use that world fiber use will grow as much over the next 10 years. When we talk about the cotton share, over the last 35 years, since 1980s, I think almost as much as 20% has been lost to man-made fiber. Cotton has lost its share of world fiber use. And we expect this particular trend to continue, maybe to a lesser extent, but we do believe that this trend will continue with better man-made fiber products that make their way to the market. So fiber use going down to 22%, which puts the world consumption pretty much about 20 million bales higher. And China and India, I estimate, will still continue to be a similar share of 55%, 56% of world consumption, which basically puts the Chinese consumption at 9.5 million tons by 2025, which is about 1.5 million tons bigger than what we think the consumption in 2015 is going to be. This is of course on the back that China remains highly competitive and adaptable to varied market conditions, and also they have massive downstream growth as well as support to their own spinning industry. And also there is the Chinese government has pledged to invest as much as $3.2 billion equivalent in Xinjiang to promote textile industry over the next 10 years so that they can grow the consumption of cotton in Xinjiang itself. Similarly in India, we've seen various states all across the country subsidizing and incentivizing textile growth, spinning growth, which should help us gain a consumption of 37.5 million bales by 2025. Going on to area, we feel that the food and feed crops will dominate, and while China will continue to lose area, mainly because of labor issues, India may lose only a little bit. So area, we think area under cotton is going to keep going down. Going on to yield, I think the big story is going to be the Indian yields, where we expect Indian yields to go up almost 50%. And that is what will lead the world yields also go up, pretty much making sure that the production is equal to consumption by 2025. And Indian production could be as big as 50 million bales, 170 kilos. That pretty much puts the trade in China and India at almost a similar structure as it is today. So I don't see a big change in terms of structure. India continues to be a big export surplus country, while China continues to be the largest importer of cotton in the world by 2025. So is India the next China? I would say yes and no, because we can always learn something which is good, but we should pick and choose. We don't necessarily need to like what you can see on the screen here, because we have our own competencies in India as well. And as we talk about whether India is going to be the next China, I would say when we get down to the importance that India already has in the world cotton trade, I would say India is already a close second to the Chinese who draw big importance as far as their impact on the world cotton market is concerned. So I think India will continue to keep flying its flag high in the cotton trade in the years to come, but it doesn't necessarily need to become China. Thank you.
Finished presentation. Now the next speaker is Sean Chow, who joined the cotton business in 2007 and joined Olam China Beijing in 2011. By taking the role of knowledge management manager at a start in Olam, he has now also been responsible for China's trading book as well as some marketing activity. Since 2013, Sean has been in Shanghai, focusing on Olam trading and research. And his topic is how much longer will China dominate the world cotton market? Mr. Sean.
Ladies and gentlemen, before the presentation, I would like to thank CCI's invitation that makes my first trip to India come true. And I'm really happy and honored to be here to share some thoughts and ideas on China market. I think I will give a clear answer that I think China is still dominating the market through policy in at least the next 3 to 5 years. And I hope I will try my best to get it well explained to all of you. Basically, we will have a quick review about what happened before and after 2011, because I think 2011 is the turning point that China is shifting the way it is impacting the world. Then the policy changed in 2014, but it's still a dominant influence. And finally, I'll try to give a big guess about China's S&D in the next 3 crop years, as requested by Mr. Chef. And based on that, let's see what the reserve will do. China's entry to WTO actually boosted the whole textile industry, no matter it is for the upstream yarn production or the downstream textile products and apparel export. We see a pretty strong growth in the first 5 years after China's entry into WTO. The average growth in the first 5 years after the WTO entry for the yarn production as well as the textile products and apparel exports is all above 20%. So basically, the entry to WTO to give China a better access to a much larger global market. And what's more important is China's demographic dividend is well unleashed, which is very important for a labor-intensive industry. The China's cotton consumption rallied greatly during the same period of time from 2001 to 2007. When the China consumption reached a historical high of 11 million metric tons. And also China's consumption share against the global consumption reached a high of above the 40%. The consumption trend dipped during the 2008 crisis and corrected, but finally followed by a steady decline in 2011. So basically, before 2011, China was interacting with the whole global market through a natural market mechanism. Since 2011, 2012 crops, China started the massive purchase program, which is well known to all since the market dipped quickly and China has to help its farmers. As is shown in the table, that we see that the China's purchase of the domestic supply was going up on a yearly basis, and China's government bought almost 92% of total domestic supply. So mills had to turn to import to fill their existing demand. Also, during the same period of time, the state reserve also bought some import cotton to lower their cost. On the other hand, from the price perspective, since the government is buying high and still release the cotton at a high price, which remains the China domestic price with the foreign price at a historical high level, the full tariff import mechanism kicked in to allow the cotton to be imported to China without quota. Here I'm just using the domestic price against the import price and the sliding tariff quota as an indication of the price trend. Also, this huge price gap helped to boost the yarn import to China, and I think India, Pakistan, and Vietnam are the top three benefit. So, as a quick summary, no matter the import demand is in the form of cotton or in the form of yarn, this is basically a demand driven, artificially created by policy instead of the market. In 2014, the policy got changed. As is clearly announced, there is no state reserve, and the domestic supply, again, available to the domestic mills. So this will naturally lower the import demand for the global market. A direct impact to the other origins is where the supplies outside of China will find a new home to go. In the period of 3 years of reserve purchase, we see the China's import is well covered, the supply surplus outside of China. But in 14-15, it is expected that only half of that surplus will be covered for China. So different origins has to compete more fiercely to get a reasonable market share, especially when China's consumption is much lower than that before the policy period. Also, just as mentioned repeatedly today, that China changed the way to support the farmers. I don't touch too much detail as it has been mentioned twice today. The production has been reduced. The dip of production has been accelerated since the acreage in eastern provinces was down more than 20%. Also, the government has hinted that the quota issuance, in principle, is confined within the WTO commitment. So it is interesting to see that all this change of policy measurement will have a direct impact on the supply side, which means the supply will be suddenly lower than expected. I don't know whether this comment is correct or not, but it looks pretty like the Chinese government is artificially choke demand to create a chance for them to destock. So basically this kind of policy package will impact both the domestic market as well as the global market in below four fundamental scenarios in principle. Basically, China will have its supply surplus or its supply deficit, and the world outside of China will also have its surplus and deficit. So in the first case, when the surplus happening in both markets, for sure China doesn't need to import more as the cotton is still there. But the origins need to export more cotton. Given the quota volume is very limited, then the import cotton needs to be low enough to open the full tariff import to enter China. In this scenario, there is no clear chance for the reserve to release since the supply is already enough. So in the second scenario, when the domestic supply is deficit, while the world's supply out of China is surplus, I think China needs to import cotton. But again, the quota volume is very limited, and the full tariff import mechanism will cap the height of the price upside potential. Also, the Chinese government has a chance to release more cotton to the domestic market and the domestic price ready to some extent will be kept. In the third scenario, when the domestic supply is surplus and the world outside of China is facing a deficit, China still doesn't have a strong import demand since the domestic supply is enough. But the reserve has a chance to export the release to the foreign market if the price is okay for them to compete. In this case, the foreign price, the upside potential for the foreign price will be kept by the reserve activity. And in the final scenario, when the two markets are both facing deficit, I think though China has an import demand, but other origins has no cotton to offer. But it's a great chance for the reserve to sell cotton both to the domestic as well as the foreign market. So the upside potential for the price, both in the domestic price and the market outside of China, will be kept by the reserve action. So basically, reserve is always there to fill any supply gap. And year on year, if the quota policy is just within the 894,000 metric ton, the upside potential for the foreign cotton is still kept. Now finally, let's just see the forecast of China's S&D and what will reserve do. As just mentioned before, and clearly announced by the government, that the imbalanced subsidy to the Chinese cotton farmers is still there in the near future. So we still expect that the acreage or the production in Xinjiang will be maintained at a certain level, while the acreage or the planting intentions in the eastern provinces will keep going down. So if we remain the Xinjiang production at a reasonable level of 4.5 million metric ton, and projected that the acreage in the eastern provinces down another 15% in 15-16 crop years, and further down 10% respectively in 16-17 crop year and 17-18 crop years, we will get China's production finally below 6 million metric ton in 17-18 crop year. Regarding the consumption, we are pretty neutral on the growth rate, since we really don't have good reasons to see the China consumption well beyond the whole global cotton consumption growth. It is known to all that China's GDP growth will be lower than the previous level. It seems impossible to see a GDP growth higher than 8%, and the government is okay to accept the GDP growth below 7.5. Also, as export market is a good, is an important source of China consumption, but as of now, seems only U.S. market is okay, while the traditional exporting market like European and Japan, we don't see any good signs of recovery. After that, I think man-made fiber, the chemical fibers, are still competitive if the global oil price remains at this low level. Also, the young import is still trying the best to get a market share in the market. So if based on this, we just use a relatively neutral 3% yearly increase of consumption, we will see the consumption finally close to 9 million metric ton in the 17-18 crop years. Basically, we think China may not be the #1 cotton producers in the near future, but it may still remain the #1 users in the near future. So all this assumption is based on the USDA's data of 14-15. So based on the above S&D assumption, we will see the domestic consumption minus production, which is the supply deficit is rising on a steady manner from 1415 to 1718. Reserve, given the mentioned limited quota policy, we just use a relative low level of 1 million metric ton for 1516 to 1718. So in theory, the supply deficit minus this import is the volume that reserve can release to the China market. So if we added them up together, we will see in the next 3 crop years, the reserve will release 4.9 million metric ton. But given the reserve current stocks at around 11 million metric ton, I think reserve still needs to extend this release action into 19-20 crop years to reach and assume the reasonable strategic cotton reserve at 3 million metric ton, which is just right about half of China's production. So as a summary for this presentation, I think 2011 is a turning point of China's way to impact the world, and China's current quota and reserve release policy will be a long-term cap on the prices. So I think we still need more than 3 years to lower the state reserve to a reasonable level, or on the other hand, the market will be in the charge of policy in the next 3 years. So basically, that's all of today's presentation, and thanks for your attention.
Mr. John Shaw, and that was quite a presentation. The next speaker is Mr. James W. Johnson, who will speak on will the U.S. remain the largest exporter. Mr. Johnson is a senior cotton analyst in the Office of Global Analysis for USDA's Foreign Agricultural Services, FAS. He is responsible for providing market and policy analysis regarding supply, demand and trade of cotton to USDA and other US government agencies. He is the FAS representative to USDA's Interagency Commodity Estimate Committee, which formulates USDA's World Agricultural Supply and Demand Estimate for cotton. He also serves as a representative of the United States to the International Cotton Advisory Committee and has served as head of the United States delegation to ICAC plenary meetings. Prior to his work on cotton, Mr. Johnson served as agricultural attaché in the U.S. mission to the European Union in Brussels, Belgium. He has also worked on Europe around agriculture negotiation. Mr. Johnson was raised on his family's farm in Iowa. He has a Bachelor of Science degree in Agricultural Business and a Master of Science degree in Agricultural Economics from Iowa State University and a Juris Doctorate from the University of Minnesota. Mr. Johnson.
Thank you for the introduction and good afternoon. I'm always a little trepidation. I'm the last speaker of the day, so I'll try and keep this short and to the point. I've been asked to discuss, will the United States remain the largest cotton exporter? The simple answer is the USDA economist is yes. USDA publishes every year a 10-year baseline projection for world trade for cotton. And according to our current baseline, the U.S. will remain the largest exporter for the next 10 years. However, as an economist, I learned to take all forecasts, including my own, with a grain of salt. So, does this seem realistic? Looking at the history of trade, the U.S. has been the largest exporter for over 20 years. And only in 3 years in the last 20 has another country been within 2 million bales of the U.S. So that would make our forecast seem plausible. how good has USDA been? I went back, something economists don't like to do, I went back to 2000, actually this is our 2008 baseline forecast, and compared it to what the actual trade was for the US and the world. So our projections have a pretty good track record. You can see the US exports the last 2 years have been below the baseline. That was largely due to the drought in Texas, which in 2008 would have been difficult to forecast. And the world trade, the bump above was due largely to the China policy. Again, in 2008 would have been difficult to see. So we have a fairly good track record. I think the question, really what the organizers wanted me to address was, will the new U.S. Farm Bill change U.S. exports? And I think, you know, the UF last baseline was published before the Farm Bill was adopted. The next baseline will not be published until February. Actually, tomorrow I get on the plane to go home and we start work on it next week. So I don't have the new forecast, but I can talk about the things that will go into our analysis. I'm just going to talk about the U.S. Farm Bill. The other speakers have talked about what is going on in India and China. As we've seen, developments in China are hard to forecast. And developments in India are also hard to forecast. So I think those must be looked at as we move ahead. First, I want to point out that U.S. exports are not that dependent on the U.S. support policy. Since 2006, U.S. support for cotton producers has fallen by 90% and remained low over the last 3 or 4 years, while U.S. exports have remained relatively stable. So obviously decreasing U.S. subsidies did not dramatically affect U.S. export competitiveness. So before I talk about the new Farm Bill, I want to talk about the old program so we can discuss how they will change and the impacts that might have. The previous Farm Bill, really there are two types of support: price-related supports and insurance programs. Price-related supports are the programs that most people have heard about. First is the marketing loan. The government provides loans to farmers at 52 cents a pound after harvest. These are non-recourse loans. If the price falls below 52 cents, the farmer is able to pay back the loan at the lower price, thus assuring he receives what he sells the cotton for in the market, and then the forgiveness on the 52-cent loan. The next payments are counter-cyclical payments, which are paid if prices were below 62 cents, to assure that and these were based on historical yields. So that would assure that the farmer would receive 64 cents on average for their cotton. The last payment was direct support. These have been decoupled for many years, and the farmer receives these whether they produce cotton or another commodity, so they have limited impact on production decisions by farmers. The other one, insurance programs. Insurance programs in the United States are similar. India has insurance for producers. The subsidy in the U.S. system is that the government provides a subsidy for the insurance premium. Farmers purchase insurance from private companies who provide various forms of crop insurance: yield insurance, revenue insurance. So the subsidy comes in that the farmer chooses or chooses not to purchase insurance, and the government pays for part of the subsidy, for part of the premium of the insurance. So now looking to the new Farm Bill, what has happened? On the price-related supports, the direct payments are eliminated, the countercyclical payments are eliminated, leaving only the marketing loan payment program in place. The marketing loan has been at 52 cents per pound for almost 20 years. Under the new program, The highest the market loan can be is 52 cents, and it can move down to as low as 45 cents if world prices stay low. So it's now linked, it will move based on a moving average of world prices. So the assured minimum price that a farmer will produce or will receive, it will be somewhere between 45 and 52 cents depending on world prices. This is a fairly significant cut from the current program. What happens on the insurance side? As Dr. Townsend talked about earlier, and what everyone has heard about is STAX, which is the new insurance. What this is additional insurance that farmers can purchase, again, from private companies that provide a greater level of protection. The traditional crop insurance programs have only provided coverage up to about 70% of expected revenue. At the beginning of the year, the expected price is determined based on the futures price. The average yields are calculated, giving the expected return. The conventional crop insurance would only cover up to 70%, so the farmer was at risk for 30% due to either a price decline or a yield decline. STAX is additional insurance that covers up to a 90%. The farmer can choose to purchase this insurance. The premiums are set by the private companies, and then the government will subsidize the premium. The farmer then has to pay for part of the premium and the government pays for the other. So under STAX, at the beginning of the year, I have several examples here. In the one on the left, at the beginning of the year, the price is 90 cents. The historical yield is 1,000 pounds per acre. Projected revenue would be $900. Conventional insurance would provide up to 70% or $630. STAX would cover up to 90% or $810. So at the end of the year, depending on the yield and the price, if the price falls to 60 cents and the yield is average at 1,000 pounds, the actual revenue would be $600. This is below the $630 for the conventional. The farmer would receive a payment from the insurance company for $30 per acre, and the STAX would pay $210 under that insurance premium. However, the same farmer, if at the beginning of the year the price was 60 cents, and at the end of the year was 60 cents, and had an average yield, the producer would receive no payments from either insurance policy. So again, the main shift of this is moving from a target price around 72 cents, which has been fixed for many years and doesn't vary with the market conditions, to an insurance providing most of the benefits under an insurance program where the price and the expected revenue are determined each marketing year, so it reflects the current market situation. If prices are low, the farmer should expect to receive low prices. If prices are high, the insurance will assure that he should expect to receive relatively high prices, thus encouraging farmers to make their decisions based on the market conditions rather than a fixed target price that doesn't change year to year. I want to point out that my examples are very averages. These are very complicated policies. Farmers have many choices on the level and the type of coverage. That is up to the farmer to choose which policies to buy. Again, the government support is that the government, for these policies, will subsidize the purchase by paying part of the premiums that the farmers pay to purchase the insurance. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much to all the speakers. If there are any questions from the audience, please, we'll be pleased to take some. Yes, Mr. Bhatt.
Thank you, Mr. Patelia. I'd like to ask a shorter question, if I may. It's about the reserve stocks, the government stocks. One of the speakers this morning made reference to rotation of stocks, that the government would rotate stocks. I see no evidence of that currently taking place. And I also am under the impression that the quality of the stocks that are held by the government is questionable. So, if in the next 3 years, I think you were projecting, these stocks are going to be released to the industry, is there not going to be a problem for the industry because the quality is deficient?
Thanks for the question. I think the answer is clear, yes. It's for sure. Everyone is talking about the quality when it was delivered to the reserve, and considering the natural deteriorating quality, they have to release at a much lower than the market price, so that they can drive some interest in taking this kind of supply.
But there is no intention to rotate stocks at the moment, as far as we can see. There's no intention to rotate stocks, is that correct?
I can't say yes or no. From the current statement from the government, it seems no intention to, to increase the stocks by any actions. Yeah, maybe if the import price is really cheap enough. But the conditions on the rotation is they have to release some, then buy some. If they cannot release some, but just buy some, is just increase the total stocks.
Comment on that a little. Can you hear me? In 2010, when China was releasing stocks, there were the same concerns. They were releasing that was in some cases 5 or 6 years old. Pricing does wonderful things to get people over quality issues. So I think the question of when release comes, how it will be priced, and when the market understands the qualities that are coming out, then the price will be determined. On the rotation, I've seen nothing currently regarding stock rotation. However, early on, when the program was initially announced 3 years ago, there were some vague references to assurances to maintain the quality of stocks, including rotation, but no policy announcements. Certainly not in the last year have there been any official statements on that.
Any more questions? Yes. Yes,
India has been is one of the major cotton exporters to China. I'm wondering whether, besides the effect of having limited quotas for the next year, how are the views about yarn exports to China? Will they be affected as well? Will they be benefited, or maybe somebody of you has some idea about this?
Yeah, while the cotton exports, of course, will be subject to the competitiveness of Indian cotton versus the other origins, and that is, of course, limited by the quota in China. I would say yarn imports into China are a function of the price ARB between the Chinese interior cotton prices versus the world prices. If that arb is wide, they can still afford to keep importing yarn because they cannot spin their own cotton, which is really highly priced. But if the price arb is not that wide, which is what is happening right now, I really struggle to see even how yarn imports can continue into China, because I think the Chinese consumption on its own should increase.
Mr. Henning, I just add some further comments based on Mitesh's feedback. I think the yarn imports, yes, it's based on the price relationship between China's cotton price as well as the import price. But on the other hand, though if the CCIE is successful in holding the Indian price at the same level, which might reduce China's import demand of Indian yarn, but that market share might be taken by Vietnam. Actually, in the past 3 to 4 years, you'll see the monthly yarn import to China is still hanging around 170,000 metric tons, which shows the fact that what India is losing has been picked up by Vietnam. Vietnam yarn to China is totally duty-free. And Vietnam has a strong advantage in pretty short delivery period. And also, Chinese spinners invested a lot spinning entities in Vietnam, which bought a lot of US cotton, and I believe in the near future they might turn to Australian cotton to spin the yarn with higher counts. That will fuel the strong demand from China to consume the high quality yarn. It's a structure problem. Price relationships is a factor, but it's not the only factor. That's my personal view.
Thank you very much, all the speakers.
For being such a wonderful audience. We hope you enjoyed these business sessions with us, and we have managed to wrap up on exactly the time when we were supposed to end. And around 7 o'clock, cocktails will start at Grand Ballroom Lawns, which will be followed by a cultural program by Malcolm at the Grand Ballroom, followed by dinner. So we look forward to meeting you again at 7 p.m. at the Grand Ballroom Lawns. Thank you so much.